Before we start, hit subscribe and drop comment if you love these stories. All right, today's one is absolutely crazy. Let's dive in.
I didn't catch my fiancé cheating during a fight. There was no screaming, no slam doors. I came home early from work, covered in oil, hands shaking from fixing a system that shouldn't have failed, and found her sitting on the couch with my business partner. She was crying. She told me she was pregnant. For 3 seconds, I was happy. I thought the baby was mine. Then he said, "It's mine." They didn't panic. They didn't beg. They asked me to be mature about it. They wanted to postpone the wedding, keep living in my house. And this is my favorite part, not let it affect the business. That was the moment I realized something important. They didn't think they'd done anything unforgivable. They thought I'd negotiate. So I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I documented because betrayal assumes you'll react emotionally. It never plans for receipts. And by the time they understood that, their lives were already collapsing quietly, legally, and in high definition. Chapter 1. Built from nothing, owed to no one. I didn't inherit a business. I inherited a problem. My father left me a rusted Chevrolet that stalled at red lights, a toolbox that smelled like old oil and regret, and a stack of debts that arrived addressed to the estate. As if the universe wanted to be polite about ruining my 30s. There was no letter, no wisdom, no final lesson about integrity or grit, just paperwork and silence. Silence is educational if you let it be. I learned early that sympathy doesn't pay interest and motivation doesn't cover payroll. Competence does. Showing up does. Doing the thing correctly when no one is watching, especially then. That was the beginning of the company. Not a grand opening, not a dream, a necessity. I worked jobs no one wanted. Rooftops in July where the heat came up through the soles of my boots. Mechanical rooms that smelled like mold and burnt wiring. I learned which bolts snapped under pressure and which men did. I learned how long you could push a system before it failed and how long you could push yourself before you did. 9 years later, the company cleared enough money that accountants used calm voices when they spoke to me. 14 men depended on my decisions. Every paycheck had my fingerprints on it. That kind of responsibility doesn't inflate you, compresses you, turns you dense, hard to move, harder to break. My hands told the story better than I ever could. Scar tissue along the knuckles, calluses where other people wore rings, a ledger of mistakes I didn't repeat. Work was never just work to me. It was loyalty made visible. If I said I'd be somewhere, I was there. If I promised something would run, it ran. I didn't outsource blame. I didn't refinance effort. That was the man Jessica Martinez said she loved. Jessica Martinez moved through rooms like she belonged to them. She had a way of standing that suggested she'd already been approved. Pharmaceutical sales taught her how to smile without giving anything away. People leaned toward her when she spoke, like gravity was optional but encouraged. She liked nice things. I like solid things. At the time, I thought those were compatible values. You learn later which differences are aesthetic and which are structural. The ring cost more than my first year in business. Custom setting, clean lines. She said she deserved perfection when she wore it. I didn't argue. I'd built my life around the idea that if something mattered, you paid for it once and correctly. I was at a job site when my phone rang that afternoon. Rooftop unit screaming like it wanted to die with witnesses. I wiped my hands on my jeans before answering. "Hi, Mom." Her voice was warm in that practiced way mothers use when they're about to say something they think is helpful. "I was just talking to Patricia," she said. Jessica's mother always had a presence in conversations, even when she wasn't there. She was telling me about the wedding plans. "That venue looks beautiful." "It's fine," I said. The unit behind me coughed and then settled into a steadier rhythm. Problems respond well to attention. There was a pause. I could hear the smile through the phone. "You're very lucky, my mother said. Jessica as well, she's quite something. Definitely out of your league." She laughed softly like she'd offered a compliment disguised as a joke. I looked at the gauges. Pressures were stabilizing. The system wanted to live. "Leagues are for sports," I said. She didn't hear that part. Or maybe she did and chose not to. "I'm just saying," she continued. "Don't take her for granted. Women like that have options. I imagine Jessica perfectly composed explaining her expectations as standards. I imagine myself nodding, already calculating how many extra hours equaled harmony. I have to get back to work, I said. After I hung up, I stood there longer than necessary, listening to the machine home. It was doing exactly what it was designed to do. No drama, no negotiation. Input met output. That was always comforting. At home, Jessica talked about centerpieces and guest lists. I talked about timelines and budgets. We met somewhere in the middle and called it compromise. She wanted reassurance. I offered stability. She wanted presence. I offered provision. Neither of us said the quiet parts out loud. She believed success should arrive complete. I believed it arrived in installments. At the time, I thought love meant covering the difference. Looking back, I can see the cracks, not dramatic ones. Hairline fractures, the kind you don't notice until the structure is under load. But structures don't fail because of one bad day. They fail because of 1,000 tolerated shortcuts. And I had no idea yet how expensive tolerance could be. Chapter 2. Jessica Martinez and the Cost of Perfection. Jessica didn't believe in excess. She believed in standards. There's a difference. And she knew it well enough to correct people when they confused the two. Excess was tacky. Standards were earned. Standards were what happened when you refused to settle for less than what you deserved. I learned that distinction the night she showed me the ring she liked. We were sitting at the kitchen counter. Takeout cooling between us because I'd been late again. She slid her phone across the granite like a proposal she'd already approved. The ring was elegant, custom, clean, the kind of thing that looked timeless in a way that quietly announced how much it cost. "I don't want anything flashy," she said, not looking at me. "I just don't want something I'll regret wearing every day." I remember nodding, not because I agreed, but because I understood the math she wasn't doing out loud. This wasn't about jewelry. It was about permanence, about proof. She didn't want extravagance. She wanted inevitability. The ring cost more than my first service van. When I paid the deposit, the jeweler congratulated me the way people do when they assume you've crossed some invisible threshold. I didn't feel accomplished. I felt assessed. Wedding planning followed the same pattern. Flagstaff, of course, somewhere scenic enough to justify the price without admitting that was the reason. Jessica spoke about venues the way architects talk about light, like aesthetics were moral choices. "This one feels right," she said, scrolling through photos. "I just can't imagine getting married somewhere that feels temporary." Temporary, like commitment came with an expiration date unless it was properly laminated. I asked about budgets. She talked about experiences. I asked about guest counts. She talked about memories. We were having two different conversations that sounded polite enough to pass as one. Her mother, Patricia Martinez, joined in later that week. She called while I was reviewing invoices, her voice smooth and concerned. "I just want to make sure Jessica's comfortable," she said. "She's used to a certain lifestyle." Comfortable was her favorite word. It meant maintained. It meant don't disrupt the ecosystem. "I'm doing my best," I said. "I know," Patricia replied quickly. "You work very hard. We all see that. I just worry sometimes that Jessica feels alone." I pictured Jessica alone in our house streaming renovation shows while I replace compressors in 110 degrees heat. Alone with climate control, security, and a future that ran on my overtime. "She knows why I work," I said. Patricia sighed. The sound carefully calibrated to suggest empathy without conceding ground. "She just needs to feel prioritized." I hung up and went back to the invoices. Numbers never asked to be prioritized. They just waited to be addressed. Jessica started noticing things after that. Or maybe she always had. "You don't like spending money on us," she said one night, flipping through a wedding magazine like evidence. "You treat everything like an expense." "I treat everything like a responsibility," I said. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "That's what I mean." In her version of the story, frugality was distance. Caution was reluctance. Planning was a lack of faith. She spoke about love. The way marketers talk about brands, something you invest in publicly so people know it's real. I told myself it was temporary, that once the wedding was done, the spending would slow, the expectations would stabilize, and the investment would start paying dividends. I told myself marriage was like the business. You front-load the effort and reap the rewards later. What I didn't see was that Jessica wasn't investing. She was consuming, and consumption doesn't end when the bill is paid. It just moves on to the next thing that promises satisfaction without accountability. At the time, I mistook her certainty for confidence. I didn't realize confidence doesn't need constant reassurance, and entitlement always does. Chapter 3. Marcus Sullivan, the man who sold confidence. Marcus Sullivan didn't sell HVAC services. He sold assurance. That was the first thing I noticed about him. The way people relaxed when he spoke, like he'd already handled whatever they were worried about. He dressed like a man who never broke a sweat and shook hands like he'd practiced it in a mirror. Not aggressive, not soft, just firm enough to imply competence. We met at a property manager's mixer I didn't want to attend. Free drinks, bad lighting, and people who talked about square footage like it was a personality trait. I was halfway through my second soda when Marcus slid into the conversation I was trying to escape. "You're Daniel Richardson," he said, smiling. "I've heard your name come up a lot." That should have bothered me. Instead, it felt efficient. He talked easily about growth, about scaling, about how most technical guys cap themselves because they hated the people side of business. He didn't say you, but he didn't need to. He let the idea sit between us like an open door. On paper, the partnership made sense. Marcus handled clients. I handled systems. He brought opportunities. I delivered results. 35% equity for someone who could sell without promising miracles felt fair at the time. I didn't need a friend. I needed a buffer. The casino resort contract near Phoenix became our shared fixation. Multi-million-dollar scope. Long-term maintenance. The kind of account that stopped people from asking if you were still small. Marcus talked about it like destiny. "This is the one," he said, leaning back in my office chair like it already belonged to him. "Once we land this, we're not chasing work anymore. Work chases us." I nodded. I was focused on the numbers, load calculations, redundancy planning, failure tolerances. Destiny didn't keep buildings cool. Engineering did. Marcus handled meetings. I handled everything that mattered afterward. At first, the cracks were so small they felt imaginary. Expense reports came in rounded. Not wrong, just vague. Client dinners without names. Travel without context. I assumed efficiency. Trusted the process. Trusted him to know what he was doing because the results kept coming. He had a habit of speaking for me in meetings. "Daniel's the technical genius," he'd say, clapping a hand on my shoulder. "I just make sure the vision stays big." People laughed. I smiled. It sounded complimentary. It also quietly repositioned me as support staff in the company I built. Jessica loved him. "He just gets it," she said once after a dinner I missed because a chiller failed at a medical complex. "He sees the bigger picture." I was eating a sandwich over a trash can, and when she texted that Marcus always asked how she was doing, remembered her schedule, checked in when I was on late jobs. He positioned himself as available without ever saying that's what he was doing. I noticed it, filed it away, told myself I was being paranoid. Every smooth talker sounds honest until you read the invoice. One afternoon, I overheard him on the phone through my office door. "We're expanding aggressively," he said. "I'm spearheading the resort side. Daniel's more hands-on. More hands-on, like I was a technician. He subcontracted." I stepped out. He didn't flinch, just smiled and wrapped up the call. "All good," he said. "Clients excited." I told myself it didn't matter. Titles were flexible. Results weren't. That was the blind spot. I trusted Marcus operationally, not emotionally. I believed that was safer. I believed confidence was a shield. I didn't realize confidence, when unchecked, doesn't just sell, it replaces. And by the time I noticed how comfortable Marcus had become spending company money, company words, and company trust, he was already living like he owned more than 35%. He just hadn't told me yet. Chapter 4. The night the math didn't work. The chiller at the office complex failed the way things usually do, loudly, publicly, and at the worst possible time. By the time we finished, the sun was dropping behind the buildings, and my shirt was stiff with sweat and oil. My hands burned. My head throbbed. The system was stable, though that mattered. When something's broken long enough, the fix feels like mercy. I drove home earlier than planned. Thought I'd surprise Jessica. Maybe suggest dinner somewhere overpriced enough to feel intentional. It had been weeks since we'd eaten at the same table without one of us scrolling or scheduling. Marcus's truck was in my driveway. That wasn't unusual. He stopped by often. Strategy sessions, last-minute calls, conversations that sounded important if you didn't listen closely. Still, something about the way it sat there, engine cold, too neatly parked, felt wrong, like a piece on a board that had moved when you weren't looking. Inside, the house was quiet, not relaxed quiet, waiting quiet. They were sitting on opposite ends of the couch, hands folded, eyes down. Jessica's makeup had collapsed into dark streaks under her eyes. Marcus stared at the floor like it was giving instructions. For a moment, I thought someone had died. "Hey," I said. My voice sounded normal. That should have warned me. "What's going on?" Jessica inhaled like she was preparing to jump. "I'm pregnant." The word hit before the meaning did. I smiled, dropped my keys, felt something loosen in my chest that I hadn't realized was tight. "That's wow," I said. I took a step toward her. "Why are you crying?" I was already doing math, due dates, schedules, how to make it work. The brain does that when it's trained to solve problems. Marcus looked up. "I'm sorry, man," he said. His voice cracked in a way that sounded rehearsed. "It's mine." Time didn't stop. Tilted. I felt the back of the chair under my hand before I realized I'd reached for it. My body was ahead of me now, taking precautions. "What?" I asked. The word came out flat, like I was checking a reading. Jessica started talking all at once. Confused, scared, didn't know how it happened, didn't know what she wanted. Her hands fluttered like she was trying to catch something invisible. Marcus leaned forward, elbows on knees. Serious, concerned, prepared. "It wasn't planned," he said. "We tried to stop. The connection was just strong. Strong like gravity, like weather, like something that happened to them." I looked at Jessica. She wouldn't meet my eyes. "How long?" I asked. Silence answered before Marcus did. "About 8 months. The numbers rearranged themselves. 8 months, 15 weeks, holidays, late nights, dinners I missed, gifts I bought to compensate for absence. Moments I assumed were empty. I learned the baby wasn't mine. The way you learn a building is condemned. Suddenly and without appeal, Jessica finally looked up. "I love you," she said. "I'm just confused." Confused? As if fidelity was a multiple-choice question. Marcus nodded along. "We're all adults here," he said. "We don't have to destroy everything over this. There's a mature way forward." Mature, like calling a demolition a renovation. I watched them explain my life to me, how this didn't have to change the business, how the wedding could be postponed, how Jessica could stay while she figured things out. They spoke carefully like people who believe tone could substitute for accountability. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I just stood there watching the math fail in real time, realizing that some equations don't balance because someone's been cooking the numbers the whole time. And the worst part wasn't the betrayal. It was how reasonable they expected me to be about it. Chapter 5. Let's be mature about the betrayal. Marcus was the first one to recover. That alone told me everything I needed to know. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped like he was about to negotiate a contract instead of explain why he detonated my life. His voice dropped into that calm register he used with nervous clients. The one that suggested solutions already existed. If only everyone stayed reasonable. "Look," he said, "this doesn't have to get ugly." Jessica nodded immediately like he'd said something profound instead of insulting. "We just need time," she added. "Space to think, to breathe." I stayed standing, not deliberately. I just didn't trust myself to sit down yet. Sitting felt like agreement. Marcus kept going. "We've built something together," he said. "The company, the reputation, years of work. It would be insane to throw that away over a personal complication." Personal complication. Like a scheduling conflict, like a missed call, like the weather. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because the human brain sometimes produces laughter when it encounters something too stupid to process normally. Jessica reached for that thread. We don't have to rush into decisions. She said we could postpone the wedding just for now. I can stay here while I figure out what I want. Stay here in my house with his child while she figured out what she wanted. I looked at her and wondered how long she'd been practicing that sentence. How many times she'd said it in her head until it sounded reasonable. How long? I asked. Marcus answered before she could. 8 months, he said confidently. That should be enough time for everyone to cool off. 8 months. The same amount of time they'd already stolen. They wanted maturity. What they meant was compliance and the business. I asked. Marcus smiled, relieved I was engaging. Untouched, he said. We keep things professional, separate, personal from work. He said it like that boundary hadn't already been bulldozed. Jessica stood up then, moving closer to me. Her eyes were glassy, her voice soft. You're abandoning me, she said. I'm pregnant. Daniel. There it was, the pivot. From choice to condition. I felt something hardened behind my ribs. Not anger, clarity. You weren't pregnant alone, I said. She flinched like I'd broken some unspoken rule. Marcus stood too, stepping into my space just enough to test it. Manto man, he said. Brotherhood has to count for something. Brotherhood, he said it like a password, like it unlocked immunity. I looked at him then, really looked at the confidence that assumed forgiveness was inevitable. At the calm that only exists when someone believes consequences are theoretical. Get out, I said. Marcus blinked. Come on, he said. Let's not do something we can't undo. You have about 5 seconds, I replied before I stopped being polite. He raised his hands, backing away slowly, disbelief flickering across his face as the situation finally recalibrated. This is crazy, he said. You're blowing everything up. No, he'd done that already. I was just refusing to stand under the debris. He grabbed his keys and left without looking back. The door slammed hard enough to rattle the frame. His truck roared out of the driveway like it was fleeing a crime scene. Jessica stared after him, then back at me. You can't kick me out, she said. This is my home too. Her voice shook now, not with confusion, but fear. I met her eyes. Your name isn't on the deed, I said. It's not on the mortgage. It's not on the utilities. Silence filled the room again, thicker this time. I live here, she whispered. For now, I said, protected by law, not love. I grabbed my keys and headed for the door. I needed air, distance. Time to let the shock settle into something usable. As I stepped outside, I realized something else. They hadn't asked for forgiveness. They'd asked for accommodation, and that told me exactly how this was going to end. Chapter 6. Trevor Hayes and the Couch of Clarity. Trevor answered the door in socks and a faded college hoodie, holding a slice of pizza like it was a peace offering. He took one look at my face and didn't ask questions. Kitchen or couch? He said. Couch, I replied. He stepped aside and let me in without ceremony. Trevor's place smelled like grease, coffee, and a life that didn't pretend to be curated. Tools leaned against the wall like they'd been set down mid-thought. A plumbing manual sat open on the coffee table, pages bent where real problems had been solved. I sat. The couch sagged in the middle like it had been trained to accept weight without complaint. Trevor handed me a soda and sat in the armchair across from me. He didn't fill the silence. That was his gift. Some people rushed to plug gaps. Trevor let them widen until the truth fell through. When I finally spoke, it all came out in one controlled spill. Not dramatic, just sequential. The pregnancy, the confession, the plan they presented like a group project. Trevor listened. No interruptions, no raised eyebrows. He finished his slice, wiped his hands on a napkin, and leaned back. So he said, your fiancé slept with your business partner, got pregnant, and their solution is for you to be emotionally flexible while continuing to fund the situation. That's the proposal, I said. He nodded slowly. Bold, he said. Stupid, but bold. I stared at the wall while the words settled. I felt lighter saying them out loud. Not better, just less compressed. That night, After Trevor went to bed, I sat awake on the couch longer than necessary, staring at nothing. Control wasn't strength, it was survival. Kay took a drink and tilted his head. You know this wasn't an accident, right? I didn't answer. 8 months isn't a mistake, he continued. That's a plan. That's a hedge. The word landed cleanly. She watched you build something valuable, he said. Saw your income go up. Saw the hours, the pressure. Then she hedged her bets with the guy standing next to you. I thought of Jessica calling Marcus visionary. Thought of Marcus speaking for me in meetings. Thought of how comfortable he'd become spending money that wasn't his. And Marcus, Trevor added, he wasn't just sleeping with your fiancée. He was auditioning for what? I asked. Trevor gave me a look like I'd missed something obvious. For your job? The room went quiet again. Apparently, I was funding my own replacement. Trevor stood and grabbed another slice, chewing thoughtfully. Here's the thing, he said. You didn't lose anything tonight. You found out what you were paying for. I leaned back into the couch, feeling the springs protest under my weight. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I didn't check it. Call didn't tell me what to do. He didn't offer advice, dressed up as wisdom. He offered perspective and pizza. And somehow that was enough to turn the chaos into something with edges. For the first time that night, I wasn't replaying the conversation in my head. I was watching it, and what I saw wasn't confusion. It was strategy. Chapter 7. Robert Chambers finds patterns. I didn't hire a private investigator because I was angry. Anger makes noise. I needed silence. I hired Robert Chambers because I wanted confirmation without commentary. Facts without tone. Someone who wouldn't care about my feelings or theirs. Someone who treated truth like inventory. Counted, logged, and stored correctly. Chambers's office was on the second floor of a building that had given up on ambition sometime in the late 80s. Beige carpet, fluorescent lighting. A receptionist who didn't ask why I was there just slid a clipboard across the counter like this was a routine transaction. Chambers himself looked like a man who blended into rooms by design. Mid-50s gray at the temples, clothes that didn't try. Eyes that noticed everything and reacted to nothing. He didn't offer me coffee. He didn't ask how I was holding up. He asked, "What do you need verified?" I told him, not emotionally, chronologically. Timeline, locations, expenses, overlap. He nodded once, pulled a legal pad toward him and started writing. No judgment, no curiosity, just process. I don't care who slept with whom, he said without looking up. I care who paid for it. Infidelity leaves receipts. Party work the way good mechanics do, quietly, methodically, without announcing progress. He didn't call every day. He didn't update me unless there was something worth updating. When he did speak, it was in complete sentences that didn't invite interpretation. Meanwhile, I went back to my house. Jessica noticed the change immediately. "You're distant," she said one night, standing in the doorway while I packed a bag. "Cole," I kept folding shirts. "I'm tired," I said. She watched me like she was waiting for a different response. One that invited discussion, one that gave her something to work with. "You don't talk to me anymore," she said. "I'm pregnant, Daniel. This is when I need you." I thought about Chambers sitting at his desk mapping phone records. Thought about timestamps, about patterns. "You've been fine without me for 8 months, I said. For the first time, she looked less certain, not guilty, just startled that the math no longer bent for her. She flinched, not because it was cruel, but because it was accurate. Marcus started texting. Nothing confrontational, just check-ins, friendly nudges, comments about work framed like concern. Clients are asking questions. People are noticing tension. We should get ahead of this. Control slipping always announces itself as urgency. Chambers called 4 days later. "Got what you asked for?" He said, "We should meet." We sat in his office again. Same chair, same lighting. He slid a folder across the desk. Inside was order, phone records, hotel receipts, credit card statements, calendar overlaps, dates highlighted where my work logs showed 16-hour days, and their spending showed dinners, rooms, and weekends that had nothing to do with business. 8 months, Chambers said. Consistent, no gaps. They didn't try very hard to hide it. He tapped a page. These charges, he continued, are company funds, meals, travel, lodging, no corresponding client activity. How much? I asked. He named the number without emphasis. It was higher than I expected, lower than it would become. Chambers flipped to another section. Your partner represents himself as senior leadership in multiple communications, he said. Clients, vendors. Language suggests authority he doesn't legally have. I pictured Marcus leaning back in my chair talking about Vision Party, closed the folder. You're not dealing with an affair, he said. You're dealing with a pattern. Patterns don't apologize. They repeat. I thanked him, paid him. He didn't say good luck. As I walked out, I felt something settle, not relief, alignment. This wasn't paranoia anymore. It was documentation. And for the first time since the night the math failed, I wasn't reacting. I was preparing. Chapter 8. Paper trails don't have feelings. My attorney's office smelled like toner and restraint. No inspirational quotes on the wall. No fake plants. Just framed degrees in a desk that had never entertained optimism. Rachel Parker read Chambers's folder without changing her expression, which I took as a good sign. Lawyers react to surprises. This wasn't one. She set the papers down and looked at me. This isn't just infidelity, she said. This is embezzlement. The word didn't land with drama. It landed with weight. We went through it line by line. Dates matched to charges. Charges matched to absences. Dinners that coincided with nights I'd slept in the office. Hotels booked in cities where we had no clients. Rental cars when company vehicles were already assigned. Turns out love is cheaper when it's billed to someone else. Rachel circled totals in red ink. She didn't round numbers. She respected them. Unauthorized use of company funds. She said repeated, documented. This establishes cause. Cause mattered. Cause turned breakups into dissolutions and conversations into leverage. She slid another document across the desk. And this, she added, tapping the page, is misrepresentation. Emails Marcus had sent from his company account. Language that positioned him as senior leadership, as decision-maker, as the man with vision. I was described as hands-on, technical, supportive. Fraud is just dishonesty with spreadsheets. I left the office lighter, not because things were improving, but because they were finally named. Jessica went public that night. Not directly. She was smarter than that. Stories, quotes, vague captions about strength and betrayal. Photos taken from flattering angles. Eyes damp but dignified. Friends chimed in with supportive comments that assumed facts without requesting them. I didn't respond. Silence irritates people who rely on narrative control. Patricia Martinez called the next morning. Her voice was tight, clipped. Concern sharpened into accusation. I don't recognize you, she said. Abandoning Jessica like this. During her pregnancy, where is your decency? Decency? Another word people use when they want compliance. I'm following the law, I said. That's not what I mean. She snapped. You know she's fragile. I thought about invoices, about numbers that didn't bend for fragility. She's been making choices for 8 months. I said, this is just the part where they're visible. Patricia went quiet, then softer. You're being cruel. Cruelty would have been screaming, or locking doors, or pretending this was fixable. This was accounting. I hung up and opened my laptop. Rachel had asked for everything. I gave her everything. Bank statements, expense reports, emails, calendar logs. I worked through nights the same way I always had, methodically without dramatics. Patterns emerged quickly once I stopped hoping they wouldn't. Marcus had been financing a parallel life. Not recklessly, confidently. Steakhouse dinners, weekend trips, golf outings disguised as networking. All charged to the company. All justified with vague notes that no one questioned because the numbers had been trending up. I'd mistaken growth for integrity. By the time I finished, the total was higher than Chambers's initial figure. Rachel confirmed it the next morning. This strengthens your position, she said. He didn't just breach trust. He breached duty. Jessica texted again. You're destroying everything. I stared at the screen. No, I was finally itemizing it. Paper trails don't have feelings. They don't argue. They don't rewrite themselves to sound kinder. They just exist, waiting for someone patient enough to follow them to the end. And for the first time since this started, I wasn't thinking about what I'd lost. I was thinking about what I was about to recover. Chapter 9. The eviction that felt like a trial. Eviction is a polite word for removal. It sounds administrative, clean, like a clipboard problem. In reality, it's a slow procession of rules designed to protect people who believe rules are optional until they aren't. Rachel was very clear. Do everything exactly, she said. No improvisation, no emotion. Pretend you're being audited by someone who hates you. That I could do. The notice was served properly. 45 days, documented delivery, no raised voices, no dramatic speeches. Jessica read it like it was written in a foreign language. You can't do this, she said. Can't, I replied. And I am. I moved anything valuable out of the house the same day. Tools, documents, my grandfather's watch, things that didn't deserve to be repurposed as leverage. I installed cameras in common areas, legal, visible, obvious, the kind that don't blink when people lie. Trevor came over the morning of the final walkthrough. He didn't say much, just nodded when I handed him a clipboard and told him to stay close. Witness, he said. Got it. Jessica paced while we waited for the clock to hit 10. She kept one hand on her stomach like a prop she'd learned to deploy on cue. You're really going to do this? She said. Kick out the mother of your child. I didn't correct her. Precision matters, but timing matters more. The door opened before I could answer. Marcus walked in like he belonged there. No knock, no hesitation. Polo shirt, clean shoes, confidence that hadn't yet been informed it was obsolete. I'm here to help Jessica pack, he said. You need to leave, I replied. He smiled. That familiar, disarming one. I have rights, he said. I'm the father. Trevor lifted his phone without comment. You're trespassing, I said. This is your warning. Marcus stepped closer. Close enough to test boundaries. You don't get to control everything, he said quietly. Not anymore. Jessica appeared behind him holding a box. My box? Things she'd never asked about because she'd assumed ownership was contagious. That's mine, she said. No, I replied. It isn't. She looked at Marcus. He nodded, encouragement masquerading as support. He shoved me. Not hard enough to hurt, hard enough to provoke. I didn't move. He shoved me again. What are you going to do? He said, hit me. Jessica screamed. Not yelled. Screamed. The kind meant to summon authority. He's attacking him. She cried. Call the police. Kay didn't move. The camera didn't blink. I kept my hands visible. They tried to frame me while standing in front of a camera. The police arrived quickly. Marcus performed. Jessica cried. I waited. Later at the station, I handed over the footage. The officer watched without interruption. Watched Marcus shove me. Watched Jessica scream, arrive late. Watch my hands stay empty. His expression changed halfway through. Mr. Sullivan, he said eventually. Turn around. Nothing ruins a life faster than high definition. Marcus was arrested that night. Assault, battery, false report. Jessica was questioned. Not arrested? Not yet. But the momentum had shifted. The eviction proceeded as scheduled. Jessica left 3 days later with boxes that fit the truth better than the story she'd been telling. When the door closed behind her, the house didn't feel empty. It felt accurate. Justice didn't arrive dramatically. It arrived procedurally with timestamps, with witnesses, with video, not revenge. Inevitability. Chapter 10. The dollar that ended a partnership. The conference room was too clean for what was about to happen. This meeting didn't happen overnight. It came after months of depositions, letters, and lawyers billing by the hour. Neutral walls, frosted glass, a table polished to the point of reflection like it wanted to watch. Rachel Parker sat to my left, already organized, already bored. Kay had insisted on coming as moral support, which translated to him sitting quietly with his hands folded, pretending not to enjoy this. Marcus arrived late, not dramatically late, just enough to signal discomfort without admitting it. He looked smaller than I remembered. The confidence had thinned out, leaving something wiry and defensive underneath. His suit didn't fit the way it used to. Either he'd lost weight or stopped caring, probably both. His attorney did most of the talking at first. Calm voice, careful phrasing. Words like exposure and liability floated across the table like warning labels. Rachel slid the folder forward. Before we discuss terms, she said, let's establish cause. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She opened the folder. Expense reports, emails, bank statements, the assault footage transcript. A timeline so neat it bordered on cruel. Marcus didn't look at me. He stared at the table like it might open and swallow him. Based on pre-contract valuation, Rachel continued, your client's equity adjusted for misconduct is negligible. Niggable is a powerful word when you're used to percentages. His attorney cleared his throat. My client is prepared to relinquish his interest, he said, in exchange for a mutual release. Rachel nodded. In restitution, another pause. Marcus finally looked up. Daniel, he said, voice. Man, we built this together. There it was, the last card. I didn't respond immediately, not to punish him, to be precise. You helped sell it, I said. I built it. The words weren't sharp. They were accurate. He swallowed. 8 months, he said. That's all it took to erase everything. 8 months of cheating depreciated faster than used office furniture. The legal process took longer. The outcome didn't. Rachel slid a single sheet of paper across the table. $1, she said. Sign and this ends. Marcus stared at the number like it was a typo. That's it, he asked. That dollar buys the release. Rachel replied. Not forgiveness. He laughed once. Short, broken. I gave this company everything. He said, I thought of invoices of nights on rooftops. Of my name on the debt. You builded everything. I said. Silence settled again. Marcus picked up the pen. His hand shook. He hesitated like he was waiting for someone to stop him. No one did. He signed. Trevor exhaled quietly like he'd been holding his breath since the affair. When Marcus stood to leave, he paused. I never meant to hurt you, he said. I met his eyes. Intent doesn't reverse transactions, I said. He nodded once and walked out. Rachel collected the papers. Efficient. Final. As we left, Colleen toward me. You just bought out a partner for less than a cup of coffee, he said. I didn't smile. That dollar didn't feel cheap. Felt precise. Chapter 11. What collapses without an audience. Jessica's life didn't fall apart all at once. It folded quietly, methodically. The way structures fail when the load has been wrong for a long time and gravity finally gets bored of waiting. I didn't hear about most of it directly. That was the strangest part. There was no dramatic confrontation, no apology to her, just fragments that reached me through official channels and third parties who spoke carefully as if volume could create liability. Her job went first. Human Resources called it conduct inconsistent with company values. That phrase does a lot of work. Complaints from clients, inappropriate communication, missed meetings, a pattern of instability that didn't align with the sales role built on trust. She told people she was targeted. I read the termination letter, cited dates. Then came the legal issues. Nothing cinematic, just small accumulating problems that compound when money runs out and impulse takes over. Missed payments. A leased car she couldn't return without penalties. A citation that turned into a warrant because she didn't show up. An arrest that wasn't dramatic enough to make news, but official enough to matter. Consequences don't need witnesses. Her parents stepped in the way parents do when denial expires. Lawyers, temporary housing, controlled conversations. They framed it as support. It was really containment. The custody hearing was brief, procedural, not final. Documentation speaks faster than emotion. The ruling wasn't permanent. It was temporary custody and supervised visitation until further review. Police reports, employment records, financial statements, a timeline that showed instability not as a phase but as a trend. The judge didn't raise his voice. He didn't moralize. He ruled Jessica didn't lose custody because she was unfit in theory. She lost it because she was unfit on paper. Sympathy dries up when patterns repeat. Patricia Martinez called me after the decision. Her tone had changed. Less accusation, more fatigue. She needs stability, Patricia said. You were always good at providing that. There it was. The pivot from condemnation to recruitment. I'm providing it, I replied. Just not to her. Silence on the line. Then softer. She made mistakes. Yes, I said. And she's living in them. They asked if I'd reconsider. If we could talk. If I'd be willing to help her get back on her feet. Re-entry disguised as reconciliation. No, I said, not angry, not cold. Final. I wasn't punishing her. I was protecting a system that finally worked. Back at the company, things stabilized. Payroll ran on time. Clients stopped asking sideways questions. Kay helped me transition accounts. Brian took over operations without theatrics. Work resumed the way it always does when drama leaves the building. Quietly and efficiently. One afternoon, I caught my reflection in the office window. I looked older, not worn, calibrated. I didn't feel victorious. I felt aligned. Jessica's collapse didn't require my participation. It didn't ask for commentary. It didn't seek closure. It just happened. And I understood then that the most honest consequences don't announce themselves. They simply continue. Chapter 12. Peace is a profitable silence. The building cooled evenly once the new system came online. That's how I knew the casino project was going to work. Not from the applause at the ribbon cutting or the congratulations from people who'd only learned my name that morning, but from the absence of complaints. When air moves the way it's supposed to, nobody notices. They just stay comfortable and keep gambling. I stood on the service floor with Brian watching a bank of monitors settle into their ranges. For weeks early, he said under budget. He didn't sound proud. He sounded satisfied. That mattered more. Clients happy? I said they sent a bonus. Brian replied, didn't ask for it. I nodded. We both understood what that meant. Performance doesn't need explanation. The business changed after Marcus left. Not dramatically, cleanly. Meetings got shorter. Decisions stuck. No one spoke in circles anymore. Clients talked to the people who actually fixed things. The company stopped apologizing for someone else's confidence. At the office, the books closed on time. Payroll cleared without suspense. Equipment orders made sense. Growth stopped feeling like a gamble and started feeling like maintenance. That was the win. Kay stopped by one afternoon, leaned against my desk, and looked around like he was checking for ghosts. Place feels different, he said. It's quieter, I replied. Yeah, he said. Like nobody's selling anything. We shared a look. Some jokes don't need punchlines. I went back to the house once everything settled. Not to reclaim it, to reset it. I donated furniture that had absorbed too much history. Repainted walls. Fixed the door frame Marcus had rattled when he left. The place didn't feel haunted. Felt cleared. One evening, as I was finishing paperwork, Brian knocked on my door. Wade. He stopped himself. Marcus, he and Jessica are in the lobby. I looked at the clock. IND of the day. Of course it was. Let them in. I said, stay. They looked smaller than the last time I'd seen them. Less polished, less certain. Marcus had lost weight. Jessica wore clothes that didn't pretend anymore. They pitched. Of course they did. A partnership proposal, a chance to move forward. Words like growth and value floated again. Thinner this time. Jessica cried. Marcus tried sincerity. Neither landed. When they finished, the silence did the work for me. No, I said, not loud, not angry, just complete. As they left, Kay muttered, maybe next time, don't mess where you eat. I went back to my desk. Later that night, alone in the office, I shut down my computer and sat there longer than necessary. Not thinking about them, thinking about the absence they'd left behind. How little it weighed. I didn't feel victorious. I felt solvent. They called it revenge. I called it documentation. Epilogue. A quiet life with teeth. The company ran without me for the first time on a Thursday. Not symbolically, literally. I was sitting in my office with the door closed. Reviewing a maintenance forecast I didn't strictly need to review when the building-wide alert chime brief contained and then gone. No footsteps rushed down the hall. No one knocked. No one looked at me like I was the adult in the room. I waited. Nothing happened. 7 minutes later, Brian sent a message. Sensor fault. Redundant system kicked in. Fixed. That was it. No explanation. No apology. No performance. The system ran. I leaned back in my chair and watched the ceiling fan rotate with the confidence of something that didn't care whether I was impressed. For years, success meant being indispensable. Being the guy people called when things broke. Being the one who absorbed panic and translated it into solutions. I used to think that was power. Turns out the real version is not being required. I tried dating. Not immediately. I wasn't reckless. I gave it time. Therapy. Silence. The kind of evenings where you don't reach for your phone just to prove you can sit still. Eventually, friends started suggesting names. Introductions disguised as casual drinks. No pressure, they said, which was always a lie. The women were nice. Some were impressive, smart, put together, curious in the way people are when they're scanning for compatibility. I did my part, asked questions, paid attention, didn't overshare, didn't perform, and still something always felt off. Not them, me. I noticed how often I evaluated tone instead of listening to content. How quickly I measure consistency, how my body tensed at small contradictions that didn't matter, but once had. One woman talked about manifesting outcomes while ignoring invoices she'd forgotten to pay. Another joked about chaos like it was a personality trait. One asked what I did for work and followed it with, "That must be nice," in a way that felt like a test. I wasn't angry, I was tired. Kay said it best one night over takeout. "Man," he said, wiping sauce from his beard. "Someone once told me it's better to get a dog than stay in a toxic relationship." I laughed, then paused. "That's not wrong," I said. "Dogs don't gaslight," he added. "They just need walks and food. Clear expectations." A week later, I was standing in a shelter that smelled like disinfectant and hope. I didn't plan on choosing the dog I chose. He wasn't the cutest. Medium-sized, mismatched ears, a scar along one leg that suggested a past he didn't explain. Calm in a room full of noise. When I knelt, he walked over and sat next to me. Not on me. Not needy, just present. The volunteer smiled. "He does that," she said. "Likes company. Doesn't demand it." I filled out the paperwork. I named him Max. Not because it sounded strong, but because he carried himself like something that had learned weight didn't have to make you bitter. Max didn't change my life. He clarified it. Mornings started earlier. Walks happened whether I felt like them or not. Evenings slowed down. I talked to him sometimes not about feelings but about the day. What worked, what didn't. He listened without interrupting, which already put him ahead of most people. He didn't flinch when I was quiet. Didn't mistake silence for absence. Companionship without negotiation is underrated. Months passed. The house stayed quiet, clean, accurate. 1 year later, I stopped thinking of dating as something I should do and started treating it like something I might eventually want to do. That distinction mattered. The meeting happened by accident. Those are the only ones that count. I was at a cafe near the office, Max tied patiently outside, sitting like he'd been assigned the job of guarding the sidewalk. I was halfway through an espresso I didn't need when someone asked, "Is he friendly?" I looked up. She wasn't trying to be charming, just curious, comfortable, the kind of presence that didn't lean forward or back, just existed at a reasonable distance. "He is," I said, "selective." She smiled at that. "Not too much." "I get it," she said. "Boundaries are underrated." She crouched, let Max sniff her hand, waited. He sat. That felt notable. We talked. Not about careers at first. About the neighborhood, the weather doing what it does when it's bored. Small things that didn't feel like filler. Eventually, she asked what I did. I told her. She nodded once. No follow-up assumptions. No valuation. "I'm Elena," she said. "Daniel." She stood, brushed off her jeans, and hesitated. Not theatrically, just enough to register intention. "I'm here most mornings," she said. "If you ever want company." No exchange of numbers, no promises, just possibility, offered without urgency. She walked away. Max watched her go, then looked up at me like he was checking my reaction. I took him home. That night, I didn't replay the conversation, didn't analyze her tone, didn't wonder what she meant. I let it be incomplete. Later, lying in bed with Max asleep at my feet, I thought about that line Trevor had said. It's better to get a dog than stay in a toxic relationship. It wasn't anti-love. It was pro-peace. The dog wasn't the solution. He was the reset. The reminder that connection doesn't have to cost you clarity. That loyalty doesn't require self-eraser. That presence doesn't demand performance. If something entered my life now, it would have to add to the structure, not destabilize it. Hope, I realized, isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself or make guarantees. It just shows up, sits down next to you, and waits to see if you're ready. I turned off the light. The system ran, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I was guarding my future. I felt like I was finally living in it. Thanks for watching this story. If you were in Daniel's position, would you have handled things the same way? Or would you have done something different? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories. See you in the next one.